The heat came first. It pressed down on everything, heavy and dry, like the city itself was holding its breath. The streets of Fallujah were already damaged from weeks of fighting. Walls were cracked. Doors hung loose. Broken glass covered the ground and crunched under boots with every step. She moved with her unit through a narrow street, staying close to the walls. She wasn't the loudest or the fastest, but she was steady. People trusted that steadiness. She had learned early that panic spread faster than gunfire, and she never let it show on her face. Her job was to keep others alive, not with weapons, but with hands, pressure, and calm words. She carried supplies in a pack that felt heavier with every block: bandages, tools, medicine. She had used most of it already that week. The radio crackled with short messages. Nothing sounded clear. Orders came, then changed, then stopped. The air smelled like dust and smoke. Somewhere far away, something exploded, but no one looked back. They all knew how this worked. You kept moving or you didn't move again. She checked the man in front of her, making sure he was still steady on his feet. He gave a quick nod. That was enough. They didn't talk unless they had to. The street opened into a wider space where buildings had collapsed into each other. It was quiet there, too quiet. She felt it in her chest before it happened. The kind of silence that doesn't last. Then everything broke at once. Gunfire echoed from above and from the sides. The sound bounced between buildings, sharp and confusing. Someone shouted a warning. Another voice yelled for cover. The group scattered, diving behind broken walls and chunks of concrete. She dropped to her knees next to a fallen figure. Blood was already spreading across the ground. She didn't think. She just moved, hands pressed down. Her voice stayed low and steady, telling him to stay awake, telling him help was there. The gunfire didn't stop. She felt the first impact like a hard punch. It knocked the air out of her chest. For a second, she didn't understand what had happened. Then pain rushed in, fast and burning. She tried to stand. Another impact hit her side. Then another. Her body reacted before her mind did. She fell forward, using her weight to shield the person beneath her. Sounds blurred together. Shouting. More shots. Someone screaming her role, calling for her. She tried to answer, but no sound came out. She felt herself being dragged, then dropped. Hands left her. Boots moved away fast. The fighting didn't last long. It never did. Either you moved forward or you pulled back. That day they pulled back. When the noise faded, the street felt empty again. Dust settled slowly. Smoke drifted through broken windows. The sun climbed higher, lighting everything like nothing had happened. She lay still. At first, she thought she was dead. Her body felt far away, like it belonged to someone else. Breathing hurt. Every breath felt sharp and wrong. Time passed, though she didn't know how much. Her eyes opened for a moment, then closed again. She heard footsteps once and held her breath until her chest burned. No one came back. As the day moved on, the heat grew worse. Her mouth felt dry, her tongue thick. She tried to move her fingers. They responded slowly, like they had forgotten what to do. Pain spread through her body in waves. Not one place, but many. She understood then that she had been hit more than once. She didn't count. Counting didn't matter. What mattered was bleeding. She forced herself to focus. This was the same thing she told others to do. One step at a time. One problem at a time. She pressed a shaking hand to her side and felt wet fabric. Blood. Too much of it. She tore at her uniform, ripping a strip free. Every movement sent pain through her body. But she kept going. She pressed the fabric into the wound and held it there. Her breathing slowed. Not because it felt better, but because she made it. The city around her stayed quiet. Somewhere, a door slammed. Somewhere else, a voice called out in a language she didn't understand. She stayed still, blending into the broken ground. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows shifted. Her thoughts drifted in and out. She remembered training days, when instructors told them that survival was not about strength. It was about refusing to quit, about staying present even when everything hurt. She remembered laughing with her team the night before, sharing food that tasted like nothing. Someone had complained about the heat. Someone else had joked that they would miss it when it was gone. The memory faded. Her body shook with chills even though the air was hot. That worried her. She knew what it meant, but she pushed the thought away. When night came, it came fast. The temperature dropped. The city changed sounds. Dogs barked in the distance. Footsteps passed nearby more than once. She stayed silent, even when a piece of rubble cut into her skin as she shifted slightly. Even when pain made her vision blur. At some point, she whispered to herself, not words anyone else could hear, just reminders. Stay awake, breathe, hold pressure. She thought about home, not in detail, but in feeling. A place where the air didn't burn your lungs. A place where silence meant peace. She didn't know if anyone was coming. By morning, her strength was fading. Her hands felt numb. She checked her bandages by touch alone. They were soaked, but still holding. She knew she couldn't stay where she was forever. If patrols came through again, she would be found. If the sun rose higher, the heat would finish what the bullets had started. She made a decision. Using her elbows and heels, she pulled herself a few inches toward a darker space beneath the collapsed wall. Every movement cost her. She had to stop often, resting her forehead against the ground. The effort felt endless, but eventually, the light around her dimmed. She was hidden enough. She let herself rest then. Just for a moment, her breathing slowed. Her thoughts drifted again. The last thing she remembered before sleep took her was a feeling of dust on her face and the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. The war did not stop, but she was still alive. When she woke, the city had changed again. The heat was still there, but the shadows were longer. She tried to move, but every muscle protested. Pain ran through her body, sharp and constant, reminding her that she had survived something impossible. Her first thought was simple. She had survived. She wasn't thinking about glory or bravery. She wasn't thinking about anything but staying alive until someone found her. She shifted slightly, testing what she could move without making the pain worse. Her hands were trembling, but they still obeyed her commands. She pressed them against her wounds again, checking the makeshift bandages she had applied the day before. Blood had dried and crusted in some areas, but was enough to slow the bleeding. She knew she couldn't stay in the open. The enemy could be nearby, or a patrol could pass through at any moment. Even if they didn't see her, the ground was not safe. She needed cover. She looked around with tired eyes, scanning the ruined buildings. The collapsed walls she had crawled under the night before were still there. If she could move just a few inches more, she could reach a space with more protection. It took hours, but she managed to inch her way forward. Pain flared with every movement. Her breathing became ragged. She lost count of how many times she stopped just to rest. Sweat mixed with the dust on her skin, and her throat was dry. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself that panicking would only make things worse. The sun moved across the sky again, and the day grew hotter. Her mind wandered. She thought about small things from before the war. The way sunlight felt on her face, the sound of rain on a roof, the taste of fresh bread. It didn't make the pain go away, but it reminded her that life existed outside this ruined city. She pressed her hands to the ground and forced herself to stay present. She focused on one task at a time. Breathe in, breathe out, move an inch, rest. Every small success was a victory. At one point, she tried to reach her pack. Supplies could make the difference between staying alive and giving up. Her fingers brushed it, but the effort to lift it was too much. She rested again, willing her body to respond. Eventually, she managed to drag it closer, keeping it between her and the sun. Inside, she found a small bottle of water. She sipped slowly, savoring each drop. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The world around her was quiet except for distant noises. Explosions far away, the occasional shout, the wind rustling through broken walls. She stayed as still as she could, listening. Sometimes she could hear movement nearby, but it never came close enough to matter. Every sound reminded her that she was still alive. Pain became a constant companion. She knew it would not leave, so she learned to ignore it. She focused on her breathing and her slow, careful movements. Even when exhaustion threatened to pull her under, she reminded herself to keep going. Sleep could wait. She thought about her unit. She wondered if anyone had survived. She wondered if they would come back. But she pushed the thoughts aside. She had no control over what others were doing. All she could control was her own will to survive. Her body ached. But she forced herself to move again. She crawled toward a darker corner under a collapsed wall. It offered better cover and a cooler spot. She rested her head on her arms and closed her eyes for a few minutes. But sleep wouldn't come easily. The pain kept her awake. Her mind wandered to memories, both comforting and sad. Faces of people she had worked with, moments of laughter, brief moments of peace before the chaos had taken over. Time became strange. She couldn't tell morning from afternoon from night. The sun moved, shadows shifted, but the hours blended together. She relied on her own rhythm, counting breaths and movements to keep her mind engaged. It was strange how small things could become lifelines. Counting breaths, noticing the movement of the wind, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her skin. These things reminded her that she was still alive. She pressed her hands to her wounds again, making sure her bandages hadn't slipped. Her fingers shook, but she refused to give up. She tried to think like a medic. Every step mattered. Every movement mattered. Even when her body wanted to collapse, she reminded herself that giving up was not an option. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten. But she had bigger problems. Hunger could wait. Thirst could be managed with the little water she had. Wounds and movement were priority. The day grew longer. Her lips cracked. Her eyes stung from the heat and dust. She tried to blink slowly and breathe evenly. She thought about all the times she had told others to do the same. Now she had to follow her own advice. When night came, it brought a different kind of danger. Shadows grew deeper. The air cooled slightly, but she could feel the tension in it. Every sound made her flinch. A cat scurried nearby. A door creaked. She held still, pretending to be part of the rubble, invisible and silent. She whispered to herself, reminding herself to keep going. It was strange how words could anchor her when everything else was chaotic. Stay awake. Breathe. Keep moving. Simple words. But they were enough to keep her focused. Hours passed, and she forced herself to crawl again, inch by inch, toward better cover. She moved carefully, letting the rubble hide her movements. Pain flared with every push and drag, but she endured. She reminded herself that every inch was progress. Every small success mattered. Her mind drifted again, this time to the people she had helped. Faces of wounded soldiers and civilians came to her mind. She thought about how she had done her job, even under fire. That memory gave her strength. If she had survived this long, she could survive a little longer. She rested again, her body shaking from exhaustion and pain. She listened to the distant sounds of the city. Fires burned somewhere nearby. A vehicle passed in the distance. Shouts echoed, then disappeared. She remained silent, listening and waiting. She thought about hope, not the kind that came from someone else promising help, but the kind that came from herself. She had survived this far. She could survive more. The thought gave her a small spark of energy. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The night felt endless, but she endured. She counted her breaths again. Slowly, methodically. She reminded herself that she was alive, and that staying alive mattered more than anything else. Pain, hunger, thirst, they were all temporary if she kept moving. She tried to sleep again, letting her body rest for a few minutes at a time. Every time she woke, she pressed her hands to her wounds, adjusted her position, and crawled a little further. It was exhausting, but it was survival. The darkness around her felt heavy, but she focused on small details. A shadow moved differently. A sound came from far away. She used every sense to stay aware. Awareness was safety. Awareness was life. Morning came slowly. The sun rose and the light touched the ruined buildings. She moved carefully toward a slightly higher piece of rubble, giving her a better view of the area. She wanted to see if anyone was nearby, if anyone could help. She saw nothing. The city was empty. She sighed, then reminded herself that being alive still mattered. She forced herself to crawl a little further, reaching a slightly safer corner. There, she could rest without feeling completely exposed. She let herself breathe, let herself notice that she was still here. Every movement had been worth it. Every painful inch had kept her alive. She pressed her hands against her wounds one last time, checking the bandages. They were still holding. The bleeding was slower. Her body was weak, but she had learned to endure. She knew she could continue, as long as she refused to stop. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun and the coolness of the shadows around her. She whispered again, reminding herself of the simple truth. She was alive, and that was enough. For now, survival was all that mattered. The city could wait. The world could wait. She had one task, and she was still doing it. She was still alive. The second day came, and with it, a heavier weight on her chest. Pain had settled into her bones, a constant reminder of everything that had happened. She could no longer count the bullets she had taken. She only knew that each movement caused fire to flare through her body. Yet, she was still alive, and that fact alone gave her a strange kind of strength. Her eyes barely opened, adjusting to the broken light, filtering through the ruins. Dust floated in the air, catching the sunlight in patterns that made her feel dizzy. She blinked several times and forced herself to move. Every inch required a decision. Every decision was a fight between giving up and surviving. Her bandages were soaked, but they held. Her hands shook when she touched her wounds, and she could feel weakness pressing down on her. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her throat was dry. But she didn't allow herself to think about it too much. The body could endure a lot if the mind stayed determined. She had to stay quiet. Every sound could attract someone or something dangerous. Enemy patrols, stray fighters, even animals. She moved only when necessary, dragging herself inch by inch into darker shadows beneath a partially collapsed building. Pain screamed with every move, but she refused to let it control her. Pain was a companion now, not an enemy. Time became meaningless. Morning and afternoon blurred together. She tried to stay aware, counting breaths, listening to distant noises, noticing every small movement of air. Every shadow, every sound could mean life or death. Her mind wandered, not to the battlefield, not to the pain, but to fragments of home. A voice, a laugh, a smell. These small memories reminded her that life existed beyond this war. They became a lifeline, a reason to keep moving. Water was her first priority. She remembered the small bottle she had dragged yesterday. It was almost empty, but even a few drops could keep her alive. She sipped slowly, letting the liquid soothe her dry throat. She repeated the process over and over, savoring the little she had. Each sip was a victory. She thought about her training. They had always emphasized survival as a mental game as much as a physical one. You could endure more than you believed if you stayed focused, if you broke problems into small tasks, if you never let despair in. She repeated the instructions to herself in a whisper, like a mantra. Hours passed in silence, broken only by distant explosions and the occasional sound of rubble shifting. She moved again, pushing herself to reach a slightly safer corner of the building. Her body protested. Every movement felt like she was tearing herself apart. But she reminded herself that stillness was worse than pain. Stillness meant being forgotten, or worse. Her mind began to play tricks on her. She imagined voices calling her name, friends she hoped had survived, shadows that looked like people. She shook her head and forced herself to stay present. Reality was enough to fight. Reality demanded focus. She remembered the faces she had seen on the battlefield, the injured, the dying, the ones she had helped. That memory was sharp, but it also gave her strength. If she had kept them alive, if she had survived this long, she could survive a little longer. Each memory became a small spark of determination. The sun began to move toward evening. The shadows shifted, giving her slightly more cover. She crawled toward a narrow alley formed by collapsed walls. Every movement was agony, but she measured it in inches and breaths. Inch by inch, breath by breath, she survived. Night arrived, bringing with it a strange calm. The temperature dropped, offering some relief. The city was quiet, but she knew better than to trust it. She remained alert, listening to every sound. Distant footsteps, a far-off shout, the flutter of birds. Everything carried meaning. She stayed low, barely breathing at times, pretending to be part of the rubble. Her hands were numb. She pressed them to her wounds, feeling the heat of blood and the hardness of crusted bandages. She whispered to herself again, reminders that she could hold on, that she could keep moving. The words were simple, but they were enough to keep her connected to life. During the night, she crawled again, moving a little closer to the interior of the ruins. She measured each movement, weighing the pain against the risk. She rested often, letting her mind drift only slightly before pulling herself back to focus. Each inch gained was a victory, each breath a small triumph. By the second night, she had developed a rhythm. Move, rest, breathe, observe. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't heroic, but it was survival. Every muscle screamed at her, but she ignored it. She had no choice but to keep going. She thought about hope, not the kind given by others, but the kind she carried herself. She knew no one would find her quickly. The war moved on. People fought. Plans shifted. Yet, in the small, quiet space she carved out, hope existed because she refused to let go. Survival became an act of will. Her body was failing, but her mind was determined. In the early hours of the next day, she heard a sound unlike the rest. Faint, distant, deliberate. She froze. Her ears strained to catch it. She wasn't sure, but she thought she heard voices, soldiers, but not the one she had been with. The sound were careful, deliberate, moving slowly through the ruins. Her heart jumped. Could it be help? She dared not move too much, fearing detection, but she stayed alert. She remembered the training, the drills, the talks about being found when everything seemed hopeless. Somehow, someway, if she could stay alive a little longer, she might be found. That thought gave her a surge of energy. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, focusing on small movements, conserving what strength she had left. The hours stretched on. She moved again slowly, inching toward a slightly higher pile of rubble, giving her a better vantage point. Through cracks and gaps, she could see parts of the street and other ruined buildings. No one was there yet, but she felt a strange sense of expectation. Maybe someone would come. Maybe someone would find her. She didn't dare believe it fully, but she allowed herself a small glimmer of hope. As the day progressed, she forced herself to drink from the remaining water, to adjust her position, to keep her wounds pressed and her bandages in place. Every action was deliberate, every breath a calculation. She was weak, but still alive. That was all that mattered. She thought about the war outside her immediate space, about the people moving through it, about the plans being made somewhere far away. Somewhere, a decision was being made to send someone, a team, to check the area. She didn't know it yet, but she had survived long enough for someone to consider the impossible. Someone was coming, even if she didn't realize it. That knowledge, unknown to her, became part of the tension holding her together. Night came again, heavy and quiet. She pressed herself low, listening for any sign of life. She whispered reminders to herself, mantras that kept her tethered to survival. Breathe, move, live. She repeated them over and over, like a heartbeat. She wasn't ready to die yet. By the end of the second day, exhaustion was overwhelming. Her body ached. Her energy was gone. But she had made it this far, and that alone was extraordinary. Inch by inch, breath by breath, she had survived 2 days when everyone had thought she couldn't. She had endured what seemed impossible. Her mind settled into a quiet determination. She would survive a little longer. She would endure until she was found. The world had forgotten her for now, but she had not forgotten herself. That resolve was her lifeline. That resolve was why she was still here, still fighting, still alive. By the third day, she had lost track of time completely. Hours and minutes had no meaning. Pain had become a steady companion, as familiar as her own heartbeat. She could feel every cut, every bruise, every bullet wound, but she still survived. Somehow, against every expectation, she was still alive. She had moved only when necessary, inching herself towards safer corners, hiding beneath collapsed walls, using shadows and debris as cover. Her hands shook constantly, and her strength was almost gone. Yet, there was a small spark inside her that refused to die, a spark that told her to keep going, to stay awake, to endure. The world outside had moved on. Fighting continued. Buildings crumbled, and soldiers moved through the streets. She could hear faint sounds in the distance, explosions and shouting, but no one came close. She was invisible, alone, and forgotten by everyone except herself. Suddenly, she heard a sound different from all the rest. Footsteps, careful, deliberate, steady, not far, but cautious. Her heart raced. She froze, every muscle tensed, every sense alert. Could it be help, or was it danger? She dared not move, barely dared to breathe. The sound grew closer, and she realized it was not just one person. There were several. She pressed herself lower, heart pounding, listening. The voices were muffled by distance and broken buildings. She couldn't understand the words, but they were military, organized, purposeful. Her mind tried to remember the training, the instructions, the drills she had followed countless times. Stay calm. Be aware. Move only when safe. The footsteps stopped nearby. A shadow moved across the broken wall. One of them crouched, scanning the area. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't see her until it was necessary. Every second felt like an hour. Her body was exhausted, but her mind sharpened. Survival depended on patience and timing. Then, a small sound escaped her lips, a quiet moan. She had not intended it. She hoped they didn't hear. But one of the voices changed, sharp now, alert. They began to move in her direction, searching carefully. The hope that had been flickering inside her grew stronger. Maybe, just maybe, they were looking for her. She stayed perfectly still as they drew closer, listening to commands exchanged in low, serious tones. They were professionals, moving with experience and caution. She could feel their presence near her, and her heart pounded so hard it hurt her chest. But she did not move until she knew it was safe. A shadow fell across her hiding spot. One of the team members crouched near her, scanning the rubble. She held her breath, muscles locked in place, waiting. Slowly, one of them leaned closer, looking for any sign of life. She whispered, just barely audible, and they froze. Realizing something was there, a medic stepped forward, checking the area carefully. Then disbelief struck him. There she was, barely conscious, covered in dust and blood, with wounds that would have killed most people. 11 bullets. Dehydration. Shock. Somehow, she had survived. The medic signaled to the others, and they worked quickly but carefully. They checked her vital signs, confirmed that she was alive, and began the process of stabilization. Her body was weak, but she responded, however faintly, to their touch and words. The knowledge that she was being helped gave her a small surge of energy. They moved her carefully, lifting her from the rubble, supporting her fragile body. She felt safe for the first time in days. The fear and uncertainty that had surrounded her began to ease slightly, replaced by the presence of people who knew exactly what to do. The professionals moved with precision, treating her injuries and ensuring she remained stable. As they carried her out of the ruins, she looked around at the city, the destruction, the broken walls, the dust rising into the sunlight. She had survived all of it, and now she was being rescued from what seemed impossible. The thought was overwhelming. She had been alone, forgotten, invisible, and now, finally, someone had come for her. The team moved quickly, extracting her from the dangerous area and bringing her to a safer location. Medics continued to check her, administering fluids and medications to stabilize her condition. Every small procedure reminded her that she was alive, that she had survived the unimaginable, and that she still had a chance to continue living. Her mind drifted briefly to the people she had worked with, to the unit she had been part of. She wondered who had survived, who had not. She wondered how many people had assumed she was gone, how many had given up hope. But none of that mattered now. She had made it. She had survived long enough to be found. The extraction continued, taking her away from the ruins and toward a safer area where more advanced care was available. She felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness, her body exhausted but her spirit still flickering with determination. She realized how close she had come to not making it, and yet she had endured. The team around her moved with care, aware of the seriousness of her condition, but confident in their skills. They spoke softly, reassuring her, ensuring she remained calm and stable. She listened, focusing on their voices, letting them anchor her to reality of being alive. Somewhere along the way, she realized the magnitude of what had happened. 2 days alone, wounded, In a city torn apart by war, she had faced impossible odds and survived. The thought made her both exhausted and incredulous. How had she made it? How had she endured? The answer was simple: determination, the refusal to give up, the ability to focus on survival, one small step at a time. Inch by inch, breath by breath, she held on. That simple, human resolve had carried her through what no one expected her to survive. Eventually, she was moved to a location where a full medical team could take over. They began proper treatment for her injuries, carefully addressing each wound, monitoring her vitals, and providing the care she had been without for so long. The pain was still there, but now there was hope. The fear had lessened. She was alive, and she was being saved. As she rested under the watchful eyes of the medics, she thought about what had kept her going. Not courage alone, not luck alone, but the simple act of refusing to stop. Every small movement, every choice to keep fighting, had led her to this moment. The presence of the rescuers was confirmation of that resilience, a proof that survival was possible even in the most hopeless situations. The extraction team worked efficiently, communicating quietly but clearly. They had found a life that seemed lost, and they had preserved it. She had been left behind, forgotten in the chaos, but they had come, and now she would live to tell what had happened. Her body was battered, her energy drained, but her mind held on. She thought about the future, about the possibility of walking again, of speaking again, of breathing without constant pain and fear. That thought, small but powerful, gave her hope that she had never allowed herself to fully feel over the past 2 days. Finally, after hours of careful movement and treatment, she was placed in a secure location where the medical team could provide continuous care. She allowed herself to relax slightly, knowing she was no longer alone. The world had found her. She had survived the impossible, and now she had the chance to recover. Her mind wandered briefly to gratitude. Not grand gestures, not speeches or recognition, but the simple gratitude for being alive, for the medics and soldiers who had found her, for the stubborn spark inside her that had refused to die, for the ability to keep going, even when the body was failing. As she lay in the quiet room, surrounded by care and safety, she realized something important. Survival was not about strength alone, not about luck alone. It was about refusing to give up, about making choices in the smallest moments that kept life possible. She had done that, and now she could finally rest, if only briefly, knowing she had endured and survived against all odds. She woke slowly, her eyes adjusting to the sterile light of the medical facility. Everything smelled clean and unfamiliar. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memories came rushing back. The street, the bullets, the silence, the pain. She remembered crawling, inch by inch, trying to survive. She remembered waiting, hoping someone would come. She remembered being found. Her body ached in ways she could not fully describe. Every wound throbbed, and her muscles were weak from days of immobility. She tried to move slightly, and a sharp pain ran through her side. Her hands instinctively pressed the bandages. The medics noticed immediately and helped her adjust. They spoke in calm voices, explaining what had happened, telling her she was safe now. She listened quietly. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to believe that the nightmare was over, but the war was still out there. The chaos still existed. Yet here, in this room, she could rest, even if only a little. Recovery was slow. The medics worked tirelessly, changing bandages, administering fluids, giving her medication to manage pain and prevent infection. She slept when she could, though rest was often interrupted by discomfort and nightmares. In her dreams, she was back in the streets of Fallujah, crawling through rubble, every shadow a threat, every sound a danger. Gradually, her body began to respond. Weak at first, but she could lift her arms, move her legs, and take small steps. Each movement was a victory. Each success reminded her that she had survived the impossible. She repeated to herself the mantra that had kept her alive in the city: breathe, move, endure. Those words now had a new meaning. They were not just for survival, they were for living. She began to reflect on the days she had spent alone, how she had managed to survive without food, without water, barely conscious and under constant pain. It was almost unbelievable. 11 bullet wounds, dehydration, exhaustion, yet she had endured. She realized that her survival was not luck alone. It was determination, focus, and the simple refusal to give up. Her mind often wandered to the people she had worked with. She thought about her unit, wondering who had made it, who had not. There was sadness in those thoughts, but also a sense of pride. She had faced unimaginable circumstances and survived. That resilience was something she could carry with her forever. As days passed, she started physical therapy. Her body was fragile, but the therapist encouraged her to move, to regain strength. Each step was a challenge, and each step was a triumph. She learned to walk again, slowly, carefully, one step at a time. Pain flared with every movement, but she endured, just as she had endured in the streets of Fallujah. She began to appreciate small things. Food that nourished her body, water that quenched her thirst, the warmth of sunlight on her skin. Each simple pleasure was a reminder that life still had beauty. She'd been so close to losing it all, and now every small detail mattered. The medics and staff became her lifeline. Their calm voices, their care, their patience reminded her that she was not alone. She realized that survival was not just about enduring pain. It was about allowing help when it came. She had survived alone, but recovery required others. She learned to accept that help, to trust, and to lean on those around her. Her thoughts often returned to the city she had left behind. Fallujah was still there, damaged, scarred by war. She remembered the streets, the rubble, the silence, and she realized how close she had come to being lost forever. The memory was haunting, but it also made her stronger. She had faced death and had not surrendered. That knowledge gave her courage. Slowly, she began to talk about her experience. To the medics, to the team who had rescued her, and eventually others who wanted to hear her story. She did not tell it for recognition. She told it to honor the experience, to remind herself and others of the fragility and resilience of life. The story was harrowing, but it was also a testament to the human spirit. Even as she regained physical strength, the psychological scars remained. She had witnessed horrors, faced unimaginable pain, and been alone for days. Nightmares haunted her, and the memory of the bullets and the silence lingered. She began therapy for her mind as well as her body, learning to process the trauma, to integrate the experience, and to move forward. Through all of this, one thing became clear. Survival was more than being found. It was about enduring, about refusing to let despair take over, about holding on even when the world seemed to have forgotten her. That determination had carried her through the streets of Fallujah, and it continued to carry her now. Her recovery was slow, but steady. Each day brought small victories. Walking a little further, eating a full meal, speaking to someone without exhaustion. Each victory reinforced her resilience and her appreciation for life. She understood now that survival was not just about staying alive physically. It was about living fully, about embracing every moment, and about finding strength in vulnerability. She often reflected on what she had learned. The war had taken much from her, but it had also given her insight into human strength. She realized that ordinary people could endure extraordinary circumstances. Determination, focus, and a refusal to give up could carry someone through even the darkest moments. Her story became a reminder that hope could exist in the most desperate places. Over time, she began to think about the future, not in terms of battle or danger, but in terms of life. She thought about returning to work, about reconnecting with the people she cared about small pleasures she had once taken for granted. The experience had changed her, but it had not broken her. She was stronger, more aware of life's fragility, and more determined to live fully. She understood that her survival was also tied to those who found her. The SEAL team, the medics, the people who had refused to leave her behind. They had made it possible for her to live. She felt gratitude for their courage, their skill, and their presence. Survival had been a combination of her determination and the dedication of others. Finally, after weeks of treatment and therapy, she reached a point where she could move independently. Her body was still healing, but she could walk, speak, and begin to return to a normal life. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she had already endured the impossible. She had survived when no one expected her to, and that knowledge gave her courage for the future. Her story became one of quiet inspiration, not because of heroics or fame, but because of human resilience, determination, and the refusal to surrender. She had faced death, endured pain, and remained alive when hope seemed lost. Her journey through the streets of Fallujah, the days alone, and the miraculous rescue all became part of a larger lesson about the power of the human spirit. As she looked back on her experience, she realized that survival was not a single moment. It was a series of choices, each small but significant. Breathing, moving, enduring, hoping. Inch by inch, step by step, she had preserved her life. The journey had been brutal, but it had also been a testament to what people could endure. She would carry the memory of Fallujah with her always. The pain, the fear, the solitude. But she would also carry the knowledge that she had survived, that she had endured, and that she had lived to tell the story. That story, she realized, was more than her own. It was about human strength, perseverance, and hope. Her days became filled with small joys. Sunlight, laughter, simple meals, the presence of others. She learned to appreciate each moment, understanding the fragility and value of life. Every day was a gift, a chance to embrace life fully. She had been tested in ways most could not imagine, and she had come through alive. In the end, she understood that survival was both physical and mental. She had survived bullets, pain, and solitude. She had survived fear, despair, and uncertainty. And she had done so with determination, focus, and a refusal to give up. That knowledge became a foundation for her life, a lesson she carried with her in every step forward. The journey had ended, but the impact remained. She had faced the unimaginable and survived. The war had left scars, both visible and invisible, but she had endured. She had learned the true meaning of resilience, courage, and the human spirit. And as she moved forward, every breath, every step, and every choice reminded her of the power of simply refusing to surrender. She had survived the impossible. She had endured what no one expected. And now, she could finally live, carrying the lessons of Fallujah with her, knowing that even in the darkest places, human determination could prevail.